Welcome to the Leader Mentality Show with Rob Clemens, and we've got Nick Stefano back with us.
Thanks.
What's happening, Nick?
Life is good, man. I'm happy to be here.
Let's get started with something. We haven't talked in, it's been 2 or 3 weeks. And last we were talking, you were talking about doing a marathon or something to that effect. Did this happen yet? And if so, how did you do?
I did my ultra marathon, so more than a marathon, which is wild and fun and crazy, and it was a good time. I did it beginning of February, and then I got in my about 20 hours or so of running. I got 55 miles done, and I ran in a circle the whole time, which was probably more challenging mentally than anything else. I could tell you lots of stories about it.
We're going to have to get back to that, and I don't want to get too far from our show topic, which is today, for those listening, we are going to, and we will be circling back. For you runners out there who are listening to the Leader Mentality Show, we are going to definitely talk about it. I got stories too from the home show. But today we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to anybody who has ever learned a story well, to anybody who has done public speaking. You are going to know exactly what I'm talking about if you're a person who wants to do a better job with public speaking. I'm talking about somebody, you're a student, you're about to give your first presentation in front of a class, maybe you're a little nervous about that. Maybe you got to come out and introduce a guest speaker. We're going to tell you about a tip today that is as powerful a tip as you can have. And what it is it's storytelling as a leadership tool.
Yes.
Now, to me, I think if you look biblically, storytelling became a thing, and people learned like that, parables and whatnot. But storytelling, it's a great way to connect with your audience and to connect with your team. So we're going to talk all about that today. If you're a manager, if you're getting ready to do something, stay tuned with the Leader Mentality Show because we got some great stuff today, right?
I'm pumped for it. Honestly, I love to tell stories. I know you do as well. But I think what we're going to talk about is how the stories we tell can help us to be better leaders, and making sure that our stories have purpose, and making sure there's, a reason behind the stories that we're telling, and how to tell better stories, and, not just tell stories for shiggles.
Well,
for a reason.
Yeah, just telling like stories that have no point. That is not good. No, I appreciate that you're saying that. I've done many business meetings over the years. I believe, I always tell my teams, meetings must have 2 things. It must have a time frame and a purpose. I believe devoid of either of those, you're not going to hit your mark. If it doesn't have a time frame, sometimes you're just sitting there droning on forever and people lose the point. And if you have no purpose, it's like there's better things we could be doing. You might as well not have a meeting if you don't have a purpose. And so now we talk about, where are we applying this? Well, as a leadership tool, if I'm trying to make a point to my team, I'll usually start off indeed with a story. I will tell a story, and then when you got them all engulfed and kind of encapsulated in that story of whatever you want to say, then I break out the reason I told that story, and I can give examples of that all day. But why does this work so well, Nick?
So I think the reason stories work really well for us as humans is because if it's a good story, it's something where you can see yourself in it. It's relatable.
Yes, for sure.
It gives meaning to an idea. It takes, a practice that you're trying to improve. It takes the tactic or the piece of information that you need to convey, and doesn't just say, here's the information. It shows them why it matters. It gives them feeling behind it. It truly is, it's when you think about it, even just as kids, like that's how we learn best. And it's just how people, it's the easiest way to connect with people, and it's an easy way to help people feel connected to whatever it is you're trying to teach them or get them to do.
I believe that what happens is that, and there's great books on this, Dale Carnegie's a great resource when you're talking about, telling a story and connecting it. But at the end of the day, one of the things I learned from reading Dale Carnegie books, how to influence others and make friends or whatever, I think that he'll talk about how a lot of people like to talk about themselves.
Yes.
And the reason people like to talk about themselves is it's relatable and you understand it. So when you tell a story, if you can tell one that somebody'd say, yes, I feel that, or even I experienced that, it goes a long way. I'll give you an example. The other day, I'm meeting with my team, And I was telling the story about Wally Pipp. Have you ever heard the story? Wally Pipp, Joe DiMaggio. Well, and I don't know how much of this is a wives' tale or whatever, but the story goes like this, and this is why I'm telling my team of leaders. I said, look, there was a guy named Wally Pipp. He played for the New York Yankees years ago. We're talking many, many years ago, before any of us were born who are probably listening to this podcast. But Wally Pipp was a player for the team, and infamously, the story is that he called out. He said, "I have a headache," and he couldn't play the game he played. So a young man was given his opportunity to play in that position. His name was Joe DiMaggio, and
I've never heard of him.
I don't know if you ever heard of Wally Pipp, but if you ever heard anything about baseball, you probably heard of Joe DiMaggio, one of the most famous players of all time. He's still the 56 game hit streak. He's still got that record all these years later. And the point I was trying to make to the team as I'm telling the story about this guy decides to take off a day, another guy gets his opportunity and becomes a Hall of Fame legendary baseball player. Well, the story was that, look, you got to be your best every day. You've always got to be ready to seize the opportunity. And when you think you're having a hard day and you're ready to give up, just remember that you may open up the door for somebody else to come shine. Yeah. The point of the story was not, hey, don't take off work if you're sick. Right? The point was you're fired if you don't show up. No.
And we'll replace you with Joe DiMaggio.
Yeah. I'm waiting for Joe. He's in the bullpen for it. But so that's the point. But when you tell this story, instead of me just being like, hey guys, you gotta show up to work and don't just look to call out every time something happens. The point is wasn't even really about sickness. The point was about give your best every day.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and I think what you're even talking about and sharing that story and why it works for what you're trying to do is that you have to remember that every person is constantly in their own head, whether they say it out loud. We're all tuned into the radio station of WIIFM. It's What's In It For Me.
Oh, okay. WIIFM.
So I'm listening to your story and I'm like tuned into this, but I'm also still thinking in the back of my mind, like, okay, like, what's the point of it? How does this relate to me? So one thing I would say, just as a tip for anyone that's telling stories, because there are stories that you can read about, and I'm sure you did this with the story, but at the end of the day, you have to end the story, and then you said tell them why you're telling it. I like to say the tip is at the end of the story, say, okay, so now what? Yeah. Because that's what people are asking. They hear the story and they're like, okay, so now what? Like, what do I do now? So part of the story as a tool is you have to kind of lead people to that. You can't just tell the story and expect like, okay, everyone knows this is why I said this.
Yep.
You have to tell them why. And the phrase for me is I say, okay, so now that I've told you that, let's talk about what we're going to do with it. It's okay, so now what? Because if you don't, you just told a great story and everyone's like, okay, cool, I never knew about Wally Pipp.
Yeah.
Cool
We'll leave
story.
Sarah. Well, no, you're right. I think that part of the challenge here, Nick, is that when I say storytelling is a great leadership tool, but nothing said you're a great storyteller in the first place. Like, this is an issue, right? If I told that story with no flair, no drama, I think at some point they're like, if I'm like, hey, there's this guy is Wally Pipp. No, you have to have some passion about what you're telling. Now that's a whole other thing. Our story today is, our show is not how to become a better storyteller. It's about using storytelling as a leadership tool. But I do believe that we're going to start talking about unpacking that. What are we saying? First of all, has to be a relevant topic. It has to be something that people can relate with. Sure. Has to have a direction that we're talking about. Where are we going with this story? And I can, unfortunately or fortunately, I could give examples of this throughout this entire show we were doing. But I challenge people to do that. Now, so what's the first step to you in uncovering something that you need to tell a story about?
Love that. So the first thing I would tell people to do is you have to look for the stories. If you're going to use storytelling as a leadership tool, is you constantly have to be, and it goes back to some of our previous shows about, being curious and actively listening. So when I'm hearing things and when I'm asking questions, I've got to have a way to collect those stories. If it's comments that people are leaving on our website or they're responding to our surveys, it's not just they left a comment, but maybe I want to follow up and say, hey, tell me about your experience and hear the story from them. Like, what led you to choose us? How did we get here? And then I have to collect that story. So I've got to be looking for them. I think we have to constantly be searching for, looking for, and then actually tracking and collecting. Like, I literally have a note in my phone that is just collection of stories, and it can be just funny things that have happened to me that I think, okay, this is something I want to remember and I want to tell this story again. I might not know why I want to tell it just yet in the moment, but if I at least have collected it and said, this was a great experience that one of our customers had, or this is what happened and it didn't go well, if I don't write it down somewhere and say, I want to remember this, then I can actually practice telling it or think about where I'm going to tell it. But if you're not looking for it in the first place, you're going to go into the meeting or you're going to have the interaction with someone. You're not going to have a story to tell because you've not been looking for that.
Well, I can speak for myself, and I can say that the way I generally do my meetings, and again, I'm like everybody else. You're just finding the best way to make a delivery method that your people will relate with and understand. But I am, to your point, collecting this data all week long. All week long, I'm collecting data. It could be a customer service experience, to your point. It could just be something where, the other day I saw an accounting thing. I told a story to my guys the other day. I said, how much money do you think I spent on gas last year? Now, we got a contracting company, Carolina Bays Homes, of course, shout out. But I was telling them, how much money do you think I spent in gas last year? And whatever the guess was, it was way more than anybody thought, right? It was a lot of money. And I said, in the last week, gas has gone up about 40%. And I said, do you know what that amount will be if we do the same amount of driving this year? And I give them the number, and the numbers aren't important here, but even that in itself is a bit of a story, because what I'm doing is I'm creating something that creates an illusion we can all relate with. We all have to drive to work every day. We know what it feels like to fill up the gas tank. And I said, so if we spend that much next year, we're going to spend 40% more, and here's what that number is. Now, what was the point of the story? The point of the story was, be efficient in what you do.
I 5 different places when you could have gone to 2.
Well, the exact story, like contractors, you'll relate with me. The exact context of the story is I'm entering Lowe's receipts from a job that we did, a one-day job, mind you, and I've got.
So we go back and forth to Lowe's.
Oh, guess what? 7 receipts. 7 was the answer, and I said I don't know what the number should have been, but 7 was too much.
That's what I do when I go to Lowe's for something on the weekend, and I'm not a professional.
Right. Well, right. Exactly. That's and this is a product of you're not planning hard enough. And the moral of the story was plan harder, be more specific, be more intentional with what you're doing. If you go to the store and you go, I need a ladder, and then you go back and you go, oh, you know what? I also need a saw blade, and you go back and oh, you know what? I need a caulk. So the point of the story was, let's look at how this is affecting the team, how it's affecting performance. It's a huge thing, but it starts with a basic story, right?
It really does. And like the actual tangible something for someone to grasp onto and understand like what it looks like. To say 7 receipts is something that I can see, I can get. And that's a lot more actionable for your team versus just saying, hey, we really need to start being conscious about where we're driving, conserving. Like if you don't give them something to actually think about with it, then it's like, you told it, but it's both parts of the story. It's the fact that you had a story that was, it had numbers. It was a little bit, part of what it was shocking, right? So
sure. Shock value story.
Part of what stories can be is they can be really memorable. You walk away from and I'm sure people, if you've ever sat in any type of a class or a presentation and you think, I don't remember anything about what happened in that class, but I remember that teacher told a story about when they got in a car accident. Or I remember when this presenter spoke about this story. Like, it's memorable. It evokes feeling in you. So it's like, oh, shoot, like, I'm not efficient. I shouldn't go back and forth 7 times. Oh, yeah. I can see what they can do better with it, which is so important.
It's such a real thing. And these are some just little things I've learned along the way. I mean, you're the expert. You do all the team training. I'm a guy who's just been tinkering for years, and I've kind of learned what works well for me. You talk about the story, and when we talk about something that people remember, I agree with you completely. For people who do public speaking, I will tell you, if your goal is to hit the mark, a lot of times people can remember the story, they will not remember the stat per se. But if you can tell them a story and a stat that goes with it, they have a much better shot at remembering the stat. And so I've found that, to your point, if I go into this and I'm just like, hey guys, watch how many times you're going to Lowe's during the day, it really doesn't land like it would.
We're not gonna get it.
But I've learned another thing. Now this is one I will tell you. I've learned that in the art of storytelling to help build leadership and using it as a leadership tool, I have found in any one setting, you can only do it once. If I sit here and I just tell story after story after story, they lose their effect too. So make a good one that's going to really hit the topic. Now, let me say this. You can have a lot of backup stories to anecdotally back up that story. I've noticed preachers do this. If you ever go to church, whatever religion you subscribe to, a good story, they'll start off with a story and then they just keep hammering it, and that's good. All right.
Yeah. Well, but I think a story gives you, if it is truly a relatable, an inspiring, a memorable story, actionable, connects with people, there's lots of ways to unpack it.
Yeah.
Right? So it can be a short story that like drives home one point, but like if I'm giving a presentation and I'm trying to make 3 points within it, I often think about how do I set my signposts, right? I want to hit these 3 marks along my way, and I'm going to have stories, I'm going to have questions, but the stories I know are going to be the thing that people will remember. Again, it's why we start with them, and oftentimes we'll end with them.
Yeah.
That's what people remember at the end of the day.
So what you're saying is, though, that you'll have one central topic, but you're telling several stories building to that topic.
So if we're talking about
I got you.
Resilience, and my keynote is embrace the suck, right? I'm going to give you 3 things you can do to make that happen. But at the same time, I'm going to tell you stories about how, and again, it's human. Stories can't just always be, and this is a thing to remember too, don't just collect the positive stories. Like, you have to collect the stories of the times that you've failed and you've screwed up, and like people want to see themselves as the hero, and if you are standing there kind of telling like, I did this amazing thing, and then it's like, okay, cool, good for you, man. Like, I don't want to go and sit and listen to someone talk about like their whole life story, unless it's like someone like Oprah that is like everyone knows who they are. People aren't going to sit in your staff meeting and be like, oh, great, Rob, but we're not you. Like, how does that relate to me?
I agree. That's a fantastic point. The best public speakers I've ever heard, they know when to talk about their challenges and their triumphs. And I find that the worst speakers, the ones who are the least relatable, tell stories of triumph and grandeur. You know what I mean? Like, it's serious. It's hard to get behind a person who's like, well, here's how I became a millionaire. And sure, you got my attention. But I'm like, but then you start telling me about how you're top of your class and all this stuff. I'm like, well, yeah, okay, good. So if you're not top of the class, you can't be a millionaire?
And
Come on now.
I mean, it doesn't mean you should be like sitting there and like, crap all over yourself and be like, oh,
really? Okay, good.
Awful at this, and like, I'm no good at these things. Like, you gotta, talk to your strengths and know your strengths. But again, if you're not collecting stories, you're missing. And the thing is, I don't think that your stories have to be just limited to, right, what it is that you're doing at work as a leader. Like, there are a lot of things that we carry over and cross over between life and work, between like before 9 to 5, or before you get into the office, or after when you're going home. Like, I think about the time that my 7-year-old asked me in the car, and I may have shared this with you before, so forgive me if I had, but he asked me, Daddy, do you get recess at work? I said, what
Good question.
I wish. It's called going to the bathroom.
Right.
So I asked him, like, why are you asking me this? And he said, well, I just want to know, like, who you get to play with at work. Like, who's your best friend?
Right.
And when he told me that, I immediately was like, I was kind of like floored as a person. Like, well, I don't know how to answer that question. That's a really tough question, buddy. And so I wrote that down in my phone. It's like, I remember that specifically. And I have used that story in, interactions with teams when we're talking about the importance of creating a space where people can feel like they're themselves, and that, we should try and create spaces where people can be friendly. I'm not saying you have to be friends with everyone at work, but like, why is it any different for a 7-year-old than it is for me at work?
That's valid, man.
And I think that we all can try and do that for each other. So, but again, if I didn't collect that story on my phone, I would never be able to go back and tell it. I would have just been a moment in time that I had, and I went home and I told my wife, that's the first time I told a story.
Yeah.
Right? We all do that. We tell stories more than we realize.
Yeah, no.
You're sitting at the bar with friends and you're telling a story.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you get in front of a group and you and all the stories go away and you make it so hard. And yeah, no, I agree with that. Was there ever a time that you did a presentation and you felt like you didn't hit the mark? Is it storytelling or otherwise? I'm just curious. Like, have you ever
100%.
left a presentation and you're like, man, that didn't work out?
Yeah, I can remember exactly where it was and who I gave the presentation to, how many people were in the room, all of it.
Why? Like, what was it?
The reason was I was not telling stories and presenting information that was relevant to the people that were there.
Okay.
I thought that my content and what was necessary, which was still valid and valuable, was valid and valuable to everyone. And I didn't adjust my stories. I didn't adjust the points I was making to this group. It was 300 fraternity men at a conference in Massachusetts. And I was still talking to them like I would have been talking to young professionals who were 23 and 24. And it's a totally different experience once you're out of college and you're in the real world versus when you're still in school. And I was telling stories, I told stories about my kids and about trying to balance and juggle things. And I thought, well, that's relatable to them. They're still balancing and juggling things in school. But a 20-year-old who's in a fraternity has a very different experience than a 28-year-old with a kid and working a full-time job trying to balance and juggle things. And the stories were relevant, but just not to them.
No, I think that's a fantastic point. I think we have to really know the audience, and we have to, and it goes back to the relatability. But I had when I was doing. Here's my story of that. Very similar to what you said, but even worse in a weird way. I do a lot of public speaking, dude. I like it, and I take pride in it, and I do tell stories. And I do try to make it interesting. And I talk a lot with my hands, and I knock over stuff while I'm talking. People get a good laugh out of it. But I will tell you that I was asked to come speak to students at one point at a school. Now, look, my specialty is talking to grown up, people who are in leadership positions. But I'm like, I can come and get these kids pumped up. I'm ready. So I made the incorrect assumption that I was going to be talking to like juniors and seniors who are ready to graduate high school. So I'm talking about maximizing your life, right? I get in the room, like seriously, I have a PowerPoint and everything. And these kids are all they're like 8th grade and like 6th to 8th grade.
Totally different.
I'm looking at this room full of kids and I'm like about to tell them how to, build for their future. And let me tell you something, like my story in my head, I'm already like, man, how am I going to relate to a bunch of, kids who, I don't know if I related to 8th graders when I was in 8th grade. I mean, much less now. So anyway, long story short, it was a long presentation, my friend.
That's amazing. They were all just like, I just got my first zit, Rob.
Right.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, the highlight was when I said, what do you guys want to do for a career? And let me tell you something, 8th graders, what they want to do for a career, ask them sometime. Just ask them.
I don't mind it in 8th grade yet.
Oh my God.
I can only imagine what they'll say.
I think 85% of the room were somewhere between athletes and singers. And I was like, wow, that's great, kids. Let me crush your dreams now, kids. Anyway. Influencer. Yes, there we go. Well, hey, listen, that's a great topic for all. Let's kind of summarize a little bit as we come down the pipeline. So the whole idea of this is, how do you use storytelling as a leadership tool for your team or group? I have 3 topics that we've talked today that I think are particularly high. We talked about making it interesting and memorable. You can't tell a story that's not really going to leave a mark with the people. If you can tell something that's memorable, they can take it with them and tell others. A lot of times people tell that great story to other people around them. That means you've told a great storytelling story. Be topic worthy, which means know your audience. We talk about don't come in ready to talk to high schoolers when you're talking to middle schoolers. Don't come in talking to young professionals when you have a presentation for a seasoned professional. So know your group and be topic worthy and be relatable. If you tell a story you can't relate with, there's no purpose in telling the story because you're just going to talk to a bunch of people who said, like you said, oh, well, good for you. Good for you, Mr. Speaker. Right. Well, I like it.
All right, so I completely agree with all 3 of those. Although maybe I should just disagree, and we can have people tell a story about us just arguing on a podcast.
Yeah, okay.
No,
there's nothing to disagree with, right? I was going to say.
They're all fantastic. Right. I agree with all of them. 3 things I would say. So 1, when you're telling stories as a leadership tool, remember what your goal is as a leader. So if your goal as a leader is to leave people better than you found them, if it's to inspire them, then the stories need to do that. My stories should inspire somebody.
That's
they
fair.
Should encourage somebody. They should challenge somebody, right? So to that point, the second thing I would say to anybody who's trying to improve their storytelling is make sure that your story that you're telling, at the end of it, has a clear call to action or something to do. I often will say at the end of a story, I hope you took notes, but more importantly, I hope you'll take action. I don't want you to just sit here and listen to this story. And if you told a good story, that will be natural. But I also think you should use your stories, if we're using them as a leadership tool, to actually challenge people and say, listen, this is my story of failure. This is what I told you this story for. And I hope you will go out and fill in the blank, whatever it is you're trying to get them to do. And then the third thing I would say is just practice telling them. It sounds so cliche, but the reality is we all tell stories in our lives every single day. We all relate to them. We see stories around us. It's on every single reel that you stop and watch on your phone. It's on YouTube. Like, there are constantly the things that draw you in are the stories. But those people don't just show up and do it randomly. They've probably practiced that multiple times, or they've edited it a bunch of times to make it sound good. But in real life, you can't edit it. You have to have practiced it. So if you want to tell the story, tell it to your partner at home. Tell it to your kid before you have to tell it at work. Tell it to, your best friend and say, I experienced this and I want to share it with my team. Can I practice telling you this story once before I have to share it? We all tell stories all the time, and you don't think about it in a way of, I'm telling this to you as my friend, on the soccer field while my kid's practicing. I'm telling you this story from work, but I'm telling it to you, and even if I don't say it to you, I'm still thinking about, I'm telling you this story so that I can be better when I need to tell it for a leadership purpose.
Gotcha.
So practice.
I will tell you, and this is not a disagreement, but it is something I will say. I feel like personally, now you all have to know yourself. I don't think you can apply everything we're saying. I don't like to practice the story before I tell it. I know generally what I want to talk about. I tell a story better the first time I tell it. 100% of the time, if I practice it, it comes off rehearsed and canned. Now, this is knowing yourself. Sure. And I will tell you, there's been times where I've over-rehearsed a story. And I heard this from a public speaker. And by the way, what I think you're saying is some people do better work when they practice the heck out of it. Some people do better work on the fly. I think this is almost getting into personality styles. Sure. But I have heard public speakers say, the first 3 or 4 times I told the story, it crushed. Yeah. And they said then the 5th time I told the story, the crowd didn't even bat an eye at it. It's like you lose a little zest sometimes as you're doing it. Yeah. So I agree. Well, I agree. That's almost like an element of what you're saying. I think that you have to know when.
You have to know, again, your audience is a part of that too, but I also think that, if you're just telling the story, not like if you're not practicing it, so to speak, tell it more than once. Yeah. Like, no, even if you're not, I'm not watching myself in the mirror, but I'm still going to tell another person because after I tell, and then also with it, I think if you have to tell a story more than once, for me as a speaker, I think about if I'm going to tell this to multiple teams, I'm going to find ways to make it more impactful. Yeah. Right? Okay. I'm going to say, okay, well, I could have said that. That would have been funny there. Why didn't I say that? And
that's fair.
I get you. Notes and critique it.
Yeah, you're kind of like tweaking a little bit. Absolutely. I do a lot of one-off storytelling. I will grant you that. I do a lot of one-off presentations. They're usually customized for the crowd.
You probably have also told some stories multiple times.
Never. No, I'm just kidding.
Story, the story that happened to you when you were 23 years old and this major thing happened. You've probably told multiple, things like that. Yeah. That you think, I have this thing that happened to me 10 years ago and I could use it to relate to my team. I've told that before. I'm going to tell that story. Yeah. It's like something from the past. That's easier than this thing just happened yesterday. What do I do? How do I tell it?
No, that's fair. That's fair. Well, and it's like I said, I'm not really contradicting your point. I think I'm adding an element to, absolutely. I think that everybody has a strong suit, and I really think you have to be yourself. A C-type. Look, there's different personality types out there, and this is a whole other show, so I don't want to get too deep in it. But you have some personalities who, I think, at the valedictorian of the school, they're the one who they practice and they memorize and they do all these things and they make it so crisp. And then you got maybe the person who's the team leader of the football team. He's not coming out next I'm going to tell the guys go get motivated. They kind of come out and they fire it. So sometimes you have to have that spirit. But I will say this, and we got 5 minutes less, probably even less. So I'm gonna wrap with this. You said something about encouraging. One thing I do challenge the leaders in as we wrap up the Leader Mentality Show, maybe a final thought for today. Whatever you're doing with your storytelling, whatever you're doing in your leadership role, try to be encouraging. Now, to me, in leadership, the E in leadership is encouraging. The first E in leadership, you have to be encouraging. Don't misunderstand what encouragement is. Encouragement isn't always, hey, you did a great job even when they didn't. Encouragement means telling somebody that they can be better. Whatever they're doing, it is, hey, keep going, keep trying. Hey, you can do better than that. Encouragement doesn't have to always be just the positive. It can actually be, as you said, it can be something that is teaching them something, taking a negative situation and saying you can do better. And I love that aspect of it, right? Man, that was a
You're spot on, and I wish more leaders were encouraging. So many leaders try to just control and like push people to where they need, and it's not easy to do if I don't feel encouraged and empowered, right?
Yeah.
And I think, you can tell stories, just like encouraging, I would say tell stories that are also empowering, like help people feel powerful, right? You can tell them a story that makes them go, I can do that same thing. I got this.
Yeah.
And that's what we want.
I dig it. Well, hey, everybody, good topics for today. If you guys have topics, if you're sitting at home, you listen to the show, we want to hear from you. I mean, sometimes we're on here and we're talking and we're coming up with ideas and we have what we think are interesting talking points to us. But, there might be somebody listening to the screen right now and saying, hey, here's what I do for my team. I want to hear from you guys. Yeah. Go to our social media. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. Go to the Leader Mentality Show. But let us hear from you. I'm always interested. Actually, even go to mentalityleader@gmail.com. Talk about a topic you'd like to hear about because, hey, look, as much as we know, we don't know everything, Nick.
No, we don't.
All right.
My wife told me earlier.
Yeah, my wife tells me daily, too. What is going on? Anyway, right. No, but we do thank you guys for listening. Thank you to our sponsors, Carolina-based Homes, for the continued support. And as always, a shout out to McLeod, where they allow us to use this guy sometimes in his day-to-day. So we appreciate the hospital system. But we'll see you all next time on the Leader Mentality Show with Rob Clemens.